I was just talking about Dr. Chaulia, and he is here. And welcome, sir. So this is the book I was talking about, and sir himself is here, and we are really overwhelmed with your presence. And the students take a lot of interest in foreign relations out of all part of the syllabus of political science. And now Satya Prakash sir will give you a formal introduction, though I have introduced.
So good morning all of you. So as announced and as promised, we have Professor Sreeram Chaulia with us. Dr. Sreeram Chaulia is a Professor and Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs. He holds a Doctorate and Masters of Arts in Political Science and International Relations from Syracuse University, US, and MSc in History of International Relations from London School of Economics. He has done his undergraduation from Oxford University and St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. Professor Chaulia's areas of specialization includes diplomacy, foreign policy, comparative politics, international political economy, and contemporary world history. He has over 1,000 publications in these domains. He has written many books like Handbook of India's International Relations, published in 2011, book titled Modi Doctrine, written in 2016, another book titled Crunch Time, published in 2022, and a book published in 2019 titled Trumped. And as you know, again, US has been trumped this year also. And the most recent book is Friends India's Strategic Partnership. I thank you, sir, for coming here, and also for inviting some of our students who actually attended the session, the book launch by Dr. S. Jaishankar, the panel discussion by former ambassadors, it was excellent, and the food after that, it was better than excellent. So really thank you for that. We congratulate you for your new book. The content as well as the title is very optimistic, because normally when we look into the books of international relations, it talks about China's challenge, Pakistan paradox. Okay. In fact, there was a recent book by Ajay Bisaria, former ambassador of India to Pakistan, and it was titled Anger Management. First, I thought that is a self-help book, but then I saw that it is on India-Pakistan relation. Now, in next 45 minutes, sir, we'll request that kindly enlighten us on what is the actual meaning of the term friends in international relations. Because in his speech in 2023, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that now India is emerging as the Vishwa Mitra. We are seen as the friends of different countries. But in the book launch, Dr. S. Jaishankar says that friends term in international relations is a very cute and innocent term. There's nothing like friends, and friendship sustain only if interest intersect. Otherwise, there's nothing like friends in international relations. There's a Pakistani poet, Ahmad Faraz, who says that दोस्त बनकर भी नहीं साथ निभाने वाले, दोस्त बनकर भी नहीं साथ निभाने वाला, वही अंदाज है जालिम का जमाने वाला, तुम तकल्लुफ को भी इखलाक समझते हो फराज, फॉर्मेलिटीज को भी आप फ्रेंडशिप समझते हैं, तुम तकल्लुफ को भी इखलाक समझते हो फराज, दोस्त होता नहीं हर कोई हाथ मिलाने वाला. सर, आपसे प्रश्न ये है कि इंटरनेशनल रिलेशन में दोस्त कौन होता है? यदि हाथ मिलाने वाला नहीं तो क्या गले लगाने वाला दोस्त होता है? और गले लगाने वाला यदि दोस्त होता है तो क्या पुतिन भी दोस्त है और जेलेंस्की भी दोस्त है, ओबामा भी दोस्त थे और ट्रम्प भी दोस्त है? So kindly enlighten us on this. Secondly, what is the meaning of strategic partnership? Because Ambassador Puri in the same book launch said that earlier the tradition was that if India had nothing to offer, we offered strategic partnership to a country. But I am sure there has been much more substance in present time. So what is the meaning of strategic partnership? And how does the present government, because you have written many books on that, brings personal touch to the diplomacy? Again, Ambassador Mohan Kumar mentioned about the election of French President Macron, and Prime Minister Modi says that I am going to visit France not to congratulate him but to bless him on his elections in the French elections. So basically, what is the meaning of friends? Kindly enlighten us on that. As we proceed through the session, sir will be talking about India's strategic partnership for somewhere around 40-45 minutes. And then we will open the session for questions. So if you have any question related to that, kindly ask the questions. We have a book stall of this book, friends, in the parking area. You can buy the book and get it signed by Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. So thank you so much, ma'am. Please. Sir. So a token of thanks from our side, sir.
Okay, how's the Josh? Until the last row. आवाज आ रही है मेरी? Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's a big occasion, you know. I talk in lots of audiences, but not to a dedicated group of young people who are passionate about international relations like you. So I want to congratulate all of you for choosing Shubhra Ranjan for your career aspiration, because and her team, the kind of value addition they give in international relations, I don't think there's any peer or competitor or rival who can match it. So you are in the right place, and my presence here also suggests that you're in the right place. Okay, so so this is my new book. Can we get a copy? Like I want to just hold it out for during the session for people to see. Yeah, let me start with the general knowledge, a small general knowledge of how good your recognition is. Okay, who is this? Anyone disputing this? Who is this? It looks a bit like Russia, but flipped in the other side. Nice. Somebody said Palestine. It looks a bit like the Palestinian flag. Actually, the UAE flag does have a similar appearance, but obviously, you know, Palestine is not yet a state. It's just an idea, which is not yet a reality. This one, good. This one, and this one. So these are, in my opinion, the 7 most consequential friends of India. And Sat Prakash ji asked what are friends, and indeed I'll go into that. But these 7 are the most consequential for us in terms of economic benefits, in terms of military and defense cooperation, and in terms of geopolitical convergence. And one of the things that Dr. Jaishankar said at my book launch, some of you were there. Can I see hands? Yeah, some of you will remember, those who attended the launch on November 2nd. He said that convergence of interest does not mean congruence. And he also said that not all friends are equal to us or are on the same wavelength with us, and there are differences among friends and so on. So this is, all these are different, right? Like, in fact, if you think in terms of power differential, जो what we call शक्ति में अंतर in Hindi, right? You see a few what we can call middle powers here, right? Russia is, in my opinion, a middle power today. France is a middle power. Japan is a middle power. Australia is a middle power. Meaning they are not great powers or superpowers, nor are they small powers. Israel and UAE, in my view, are small powers in the global context. They are important in that region of West Asia or the Middle East, but they're small powers in the overall power configuration, right? And the US, of course, is a great power alongside China. So you can see already there are quite some sorts of imbalances or asymmetries among these friends. Our equation with each of them is not only dependent on convergence of interest but also on the power differential. I'll come to that. Yeah. So the way our friendship with the US cannot be similar to our friendship with France. Why? Because structurally France is a middle power, United States is a great power. So their very approach to India and what we do with them will vary for that fundamental reason, apart from others. So you need to actually think about the position of each of these friends in the international order. I'm making what you call a structural argument, right? What we do with them, I'll go into nitty gritty with each country, but I'm giving you the broader theoretical or the conceptual framework at the outset. The relative power between these countries and also vis-a-vis India is going to matter. What is India itself? And this is a very fundamental point in the book. Is India a middle power? According to many people, it's a middle power. But I have argued in this book that it is above the status of a middle power, but not yet a great power. So I call it a would-be great power or a would-be leading power, but which is not yet there, right? In terms of GDP size, in terms of military might, in terms of power projection in different continents of the world, we are not yet a great power, but we are on the way. So India itself, I argue, is a rising power which is between the status of middle and great power, above middle power, but below below great power. So the fundamental premise of this book is it's not only the position of all these countries in the order, but also India's own position that determine the type of friends we have, the kind of things we are doing with them, and also the substance of these relationships. What exactly are we doing with each other? All of these, in many ways, the nature of these friendships varies, and it depends upon our own position in the international order. So, officially we have signed about 36 or so strategic partnerships. If you see the appendix of the book, table 3 in the appendix, or sorry, the annexure, I've listed these partnerships in a table form. There are more than 36. The most recent, I think, is Poland, 2024, and Greece last year, 2023. Italy also 2023, and then Poland 2024. So there are a few European countries that lately we have signed strategic partnerships. So out of these 36, why did I choose these 7? That's the fundamental question. You know who is Hans Morgenthau? Yeah, he is one of the founding social scientists who wrote a famous book, Politics of Nations, way back after World War II in 1948, in which he compared states to human beings, and human nature. And he extrapolated from that, saying, okay, humans are self-interested generally, and they're rational, and they try to maximize their own utility. So states also behave like humans. It's doubtful, I mean, whether you can make this analogy, but he made it. So let me also do a little exercise like that for you to grasp what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's use the human beings and state analogy. So why do you all have friends? Think about it. You all have friends, right? And then let's say you have 50 friends or 100 friends overall, if you are asked to make a list. But out of them, maybe 5 are your best friends, and maybe 1 is your best friend forever. And I don't know, young people nowadays, they have a lot of interesting, acronyms. BFF से भी बड़ा कुछ होता है क्या? क्या होता है? BFF is supposed to be the closest. So एक तरफ से ये सात जो है ये हमारे BFFs हैं, okay, and why are they given priority over best friend or just friends? Why are they BFFs? See, my argument is the ones that give us the maximum gain and advantage in terms of economic exchange, in terms of military coordination, in terms of geopolitical expansion of our footprint. India's footprint is expanding, and these countries, these friends, enable our footprint to expand beyond our immediate neighborhood or immediate shores. Right? Some diplomats who saw this were saying, why not Saudi Arabia? Why only UAE? Why not the UK? Why only France? And so on. Somebody asked, why not South Korea? Why only Japan? All these other countries are also our friends and also part of these 36 with whom we have official study. So my criteria was that which are the most happening ones and which are the ones that will enable India to become a leading power in the world. I told you, right, we are a rising power, not yet a great power, above middle power. So from rising to great power or from rising to leading power is still a journey to cross, right? Maybe it will take another 10-15 years before we can be rightfully proclaimed as a great power or a superpower, as it's often known in popular terms, right? So these friends enable us along these three dimensions. There's also a reputational or an image benefit, or what we call soft power benefit. All these friends enable our image to also be seen positively, not only in their countries but also globally. Yeah, I'll come to all these things. So 3 plus 1, in many ways the criteria are 3, but if you want to add a soft power dimension, they are also most beneficial for us for our soft power. How? I'm going to explain. So so these are our friends. What do we do with them? One of the fundamental arguments of this book is we need these friendships not only for these economic and military coordination and for geopolitical expansion of our footprint, but also because they help us to deal with our adversaries. आप लोगों में ऐसे हैं जो दोस्तों को आप साथ लेकर दुश्मनों से मतलब मुकाबला करते हैं? Maybe not, right? We just have friends for the sake of friends. So that's why I said there's a limitation to how far this human nature and the states can be, drawn. The Morgenthau analogy. But anyway, when it comes to states, we do have adversaries, right? In fact, I quote Aristotle in this book and say, "A friend to all is a friend to none." ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि everybody is friendly to us, right? We have two primary adversaries, our western neighbor and northern neighbor. So one of the arguments in this book is a strategic partnership. For it to really justify the word strategic and to be, to have strategic content, it must involve counterbalancing component, counterbalancing of shared adversaries. Without that, it's not a strategic partnership. Acha, did you know that we have a strategic partnership with Mongolia? Does Mongolia help us to counterbalance anybody? I very much doubt it. I mean, it's between Russia and China. So there was a time when we were signing these partnerships loosely. At one point, I was told by senior diplomats, and Satyaprakash mentioned this. If a presidential visit is happening from a country, they say, "Acha, what will you give us? Like, can we declare a strategic partnership as a formality?" So many of these strategic partnerships do not have a counterbalancing element. So I have discarded all those out of the list of 36. And by the way, it's not only countries, we also have strategic partnership with groupings like ASEAN and with the EU as a whole. It's not only bilateral but also with groupings. So these 7, in my view, help us deal with our two adversaries and counterbalance them and to keep them under check. So friends and enemies are like two sides of the same coin, and you cannot actually develop a deep friendship without a shared national security threat perception. That's a key point in the book. So let me start with our friends, the friends that matter, and how they've enabled our rise. Let me just go over these 7 countries, okay? And by the way, when I asked Dr. Jaishankar about 7-8 months ago when he came for my TV show, I asked him, I'm writing this, and these are my top 7. Do you think I'm missing some country which is obviously quite consequential, but I may have not thought about? He actually looked at the list and he thought about it for a moment. He said, "No, I think you got it right in terms of the priority, and these are our most happening friends." So, and by the way, this is not fixed in stone. This is not set in stone, because if I was writing this book in 2014, okay, not 2024, I would not have had all of them. Some of these are older friendships. For example, the one with Russia is really old. Our partnership started in the 1950s and 60s, right? To counterbalance China at the time, because there was a Sino-Soviet split, and the Soviets were very keen on supporting India to counterbalance China. With France also, it's quite old. We had like nuclear cooperation, other things with them, even during the Cold War period, from de Gaulle and that era. With the US, it's around 20 years now, the strategic partnership. We have now added more and more prefixes to designate it as a higher and higher. So it started off as just strategic partnership, I think, in 2004, and now it is comprehensive global and strategic partnership. With Russia, it's special and privileged strategic partner. We keep adding these prefixes to denote the increased salience or significance of this country. Meaning is not just a friend but a BFF. Okay. With Japan, again, it's very long lasting. It goes back to 3 decades. But again, the strategic content has increased now because of the shared threat perception of China. With Japan, we are doing a lot more than we used to do even 10, 15 years ago. With Australia is a new player. Okay. Beach mirror, watch out. Okay, Australia is a new player. With Australia, we have now a booming strategic partnership, but it was not there until even 10 years ago. It's a new discovery. And why is that? Again, it's linked to shared threat perception. Apart from economic opportunity and all, the Australians have increasingly become wary of Chinese interference in their internal affairs, and they have aligned closer with the US hub and spokes network in the Indo-Pacific, and they are looking for partners beyond the core alliance with the US. So that's where India comes in, and Australians are on the defensive. So I'll come to Australia in a bit, but I'm trying to lay the general framework for you first as to why these countries matter the most to us. And by the way, we also matter a lot to them. It's not like we are just gaining from them, right? It's also about what do they get from aligning with India and doing all these things with India. Why is India such a most desirable friend for these countries? In other words, it's a two-way street, right? It's mutually beneficial. Or if you like the old phrase, it's a win-win cooperation model, right? We gain from them and so do they. It's not like an exploitative model. Although there are problems due to the power asymmetry. I'll come to that. Okay, so let me start with Japan. Okay, one of the points I made in the book, quoting Dr. Jaishankar, is that Japan is responsible for 4 revolutions in India. 4 revolutions, big ones, which helped us modernize. And this is even before the threat perception of China became stronger and became a cementing glue, right? So he talks about these 4 revolutions, and I'll leave you to go into chapter 1 of the book to understand what these 4 revolutions are. I'm actually arguing that there's even a 5th revolution for which we need Japan. And in Asia, there is no more consequential partner for us than Japan. And this partnership has just reached a different level in the last 10 years in the Modi period, because they realize that Japan wants to integrate closer and to have diversified set of partners beyond its core alliance with the US. So I have come up with the concept of, so Japan, we signed the strategic partnership in 2006, and now it's called Special Strategic and Global Partnership. Um, it has actually entered into a different level. You know the foundational military agreements we have with the US, right? Can someone just spell out the acronyms? Good, good. Good. So likewise, we have with Japan. You know, there's something called AXA, right? And there's so many other things we are doing with them, where Japan has become a more serious security actor in the Indo-Pacific. As you know, the Indo-Pacific idea itself emanated from the great Shinzo Abe of Japan. He was the pioneer of this. You know, nobody else thought about this. He thought about this long before China became a menace in the region. And so increasingly, he has looked to India, and he actually prophesied way back, more than a decade ago, that the relationship with India will be the most important one for Japan in the decades to come, probably as important as their core alliance with the US. So I have this concept in the book called quasi friends or quasi allies. Japan is an ally of the United States, right? Treaty ally with a mutual defense treaty and obligations. And the United States is a strategic partner of India. So as a result of the US connection, Japan and India are also what can be called quasi friends, because we are not allies to each other. We don't enter alliances. I'll come to that point, right? So Japan has become absolutely critical. It's a major investor in this country. Trade volumes are not that high, but the kind of technological transformation that this country has seen it owes a lot to Japan. And Japan is also our key investor and partner for the infrastructural development of the northeast of India. You know this, right? I mean, Japan is the only country we can trust to build roads and tunnels and bridges in very, very sensitive areas all along the LAC in the eastern sector. And if we are now infrastructurally stronger today to meet the Chinese military challenge, Japan and then the Asian Development Bank, which is led by Japan, have played a pivotal role. Right? So, and also in the neighborhood, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Maldives, in many of these neighboring countries, in Nepal, we coordinate very closely with Japan, and we actually often enter into joint, like a triangular cooperation model, where there is a developing country in the region which needs funding and which needs infrastructure or which needs capacity building, and the Japanese money and the Indian skills, they combine and make it happen. So with Japan, there is no conflict of interest. Japan wants to have its own sphere of influence in East Asia. Sorry, and you know, they don't compete with us anywhere. And in fact, there is also a geopolitical element to this, where we our military presence and power projection in the Indian Ocean and the wider Indo-Pacific helps to alleviate Japan's pressure, the pressure that they face from China in the East China Sea, and vice versa. Now Japan is on a massive military build-up over the next 10 years. They have shed a lot of their old Pacific outlook, and thanks to the push given by Shinzo Abe, they've become a lot more quote-unquote a normal country, which is going to have a military of its own. For a long time, Japan was underspending on military, not even 1% of GDP on defense, and they were just relying on the US security umbrella for their core security and focusing only on economic growth. And of course, it became at one point the world's second largest economy in a very rich country. But increasingly, due to the Chinese territorial claims and expansionism, they're also doing a massive build-up, and that's advantageous for us because that helps to alleviate some of the Chinese pressure on us, especially in the Indian Ocean region, if they're tied down by Japan's build-up and of course the US alliance system in that region. So, and Japan also helps to, we work with them in Africa and so many other parts of the, you know, other end of the Indo-Pacific in the western side, where Japan and India are close development partners, and we do this north-south-south model. You know this, right? What is north-south-south as opposed to just south-south? Anyone? North-south-south means a rich country, a developed country, partners with a capable developing country like India, and together they implement aid and development and other projects in poorer countries or least developed countries, right? So with Japan, there's a lot of triangular cooperation going on, lots of them, and these are quite strategic. For example, in Sri Lanka, if you see, we have, or in Bangladesh, it's very critical, and I've written about it. Okay, so Japan, the relationship is steady, is growing. but there are areas in which we can do more together, and I've highlighted those. Let me go to Australia. This is, of course, another Quad partner country like Japan, but this is a new friend, like I mentioned, a country that has realized the potential of India late, and we also woke up to it late. Historically, in fact, it's ironic because if you go back like 30 years ago, Australia was part of course, the US treaty ally, but it used to view India with a lot of suspicion in those days. And they even at one point thought that if the Indians try to establish hegemony in the Indian Ocean, it's a danger or a challenge to Australian influence in the Pacific and beyond. You know, but Australia has over time evolved, and their perception, like I said before, of China has become very negative over the last 10 years, especially. And they are not so sure about the US security guarantees if they're sufficient. The alliance in itself, both for Japan and Australia, there is a thinking in their foreign policy establishment that we have to diversify beyond just dependence on the US. There are a lot of regional partners, regional countries that are rising in Asia, and we must align with them. We must do strategic partnerships with them. So both Japan and Australia initially took the cue from the US, right, and normalized relations with us after the nuclear test after 1999. You know, so if Japan is a quasi friend, as I've described, due to the US alliance system, Australia is also a quasi friend of India because of they are quasi allies to each other as part of the US hub and spokes network. With Australia, the economic partnership is booming. You know, we have signed a interim trade agreement, and we are going forward with massive new investments. And they lifted the ban on uranium to India some years ago, realizing the strategic value of India. And increasingly, many of them talk about India as the big alternative. If they are going to be blackmailed by China, if they're going to be browbeaten by China, if they're going to be threatened by China, they need another big Asian giant to whom they can sell their minerals, and with whom they can do joint ventures, and with whom they can do maritime protection of their respective spheres of influence. Australia is on the defensive because the Pacific Island countries, which are right next to Australia, you know them, right? I think there are about 14 countries, if I'm not wrong, in the UN. They're really tiny, but due to accident of history, they are nation states, they're sovereign states. So you have, like, you know, Micronesia, Solomon Islands, Tonga, Fiji, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and so on. Now, they were all historically Australian, part of the Australian backyard, as they used to call it. And they used to be the main player in that region. They used to determine the security and the regional balance in that part of the Pacific. Now, China is muscled in into all these countries. If you saw what happened in the Solomon Islands, China has not only come in but become the so-called security provider now by bribing the local officials and by offering them incentives and all these things. So, and the Chinese have more money to throw around to buy loyalty than the Australians, right? So, you have a situation with this severe competition between Australia and China in the Pacific, in that region. So, and the US, despite being a treaty ally of the Australians, is not able to pitch in the kind of, checkbook diplomacy that the Chinese have. The China is a state controlled, right? The Xi Jinping controls the entire economy, 15 trillion or say $18 trillion economy effectively, and they can allocate resources however they like. In the US system, it's an equal or slightly bigger economy, but their problem is all private money, right? Trump or Obama or Biden cannot say, all of us, let's go and invest in the Pacific Island countries and counterbalance China there. They will not go, right? They'll follow where the return on investment logic, because it's a democracy, the US model. So, to face the China challenge, Australia is increasingly looking to other partners beyond the US allies, and that's where India comes in. And Australia is also now embarking on a major military buildup. All of you know that Australia, the UK, and the US have formed a new military alliance, right? What is it called? Good. So these are all positive things for us, because again, it helps to relieve some of the pressure on us from the Chinese expansion, because they are being tied down and occupied in the Pacific, right? For them to divert a lot of their naval air power to pressurize India, they need to first overcome the challenges they are facing from these military buildups of Japan and Australia. So it's very helpful to us. We have actually supported AUKUS. There were some resolutions proposed by China in multilateral fora saying that AUKUS is bad and that we should boycott it and it's a harmful thing for the region. It is trying to divide the region and it's an American brainchild to contain China and all that. So we have actually supported AUKUS even though we are not a member, right? And there are similar formations like that. You heard about the so-called what is it called, the Squad, yeah, or they're calling it East Asian Quad. Who are the members? Yeah, Philippines, Japan, US, Australia. These are all treaty allies, right? India is not part of, but we welcome these initiatives because all these will help to relieve the pressure on us from China. You know, so in terms of the geo, and they also help to expand our influence. With Australia, you know, we have a large diaspora also, unlike Japan, and it's growing. It's I think 1 million plus now almost, and they are, you know, it's just our students are going to study there in large numbers, and there's a lot of momentum. And unlike the Chinese presence there, which has become very controversial due to their interference in internal affairs, our diaspora, they don't do that. हमारे प्रवासी सभी, you know, भद्र लोग है ना, they do good things only. We don't harm anybody wherever we go. So the Australians are increasingly turning towards India, and they need this friendship for their own counterbalance, right? So do read my chapter on Australia. There's a lot of, we also have now interoperability with the Australian Navy on a bilateral level. Like with the US, like with the Japan, we have 2+2 dialogue with Australians now, and we have mutual logistics agreements and all that. Coco Islands, the Andaman and Nicobar, all these are where the Australians are now increasingly showing presence, because that is the, you know, entry point to what is called the Malacca Strait, right? And the Sunda and the Lombok, all these are in that area. So the Australians can play a big hand by coordinating with us in the event of war or in the event of a blockade or an attempted blockade by China. There's a lot of coordination, interoperability going on. They're even talking about interchangeability, which is a more advanced concept of military cooperation than just interoperability, right? So read the chapter on Australia, because this is an exciting new partnership. It was not there. All these developments I'm talking about have, you know, occurred only over the last 10 years. Then, of course, it goes without saying the United States partnership is the most important, simply because, you know, think about it logically. How can a rising power like India, above middle power, as I say, become a great power if it antagonizes both the existing great powers? That will mean that the obstacles to our rise are tremendous. You know, we already have an antagonist who is a great power. Our number one adversary is already a great power. How can we also have the only other great power who is also inimical or adversarial? We can't afford it, right? So the US partnership, people are very sensitive about it in India, and everyone has a viewpoint. And there's a lot of, especially older generations, there's a lot of carry forward of the baggage from the Cold War period. A lot of mistrust, fear, conspiracy theories about the US. They're meddling in our internal affairs. Look at this Khalistan. It's all being stoked by the Americans. They don't want us to rise. They are trying to, control or to destabilize India. Look what happened in Bangladesh. There's an American hand trying to weaken India. You hear a lot of this kind of conversation in the media. Don't fall for it. I will only say that these are temporary lack of convergences, or to quote Dr. Jaishankar, convergence doesn't mean congruence. It doesn't mean that on each and every issue we will agree with each and every friend. There will be disagreements. आप अपने दोस्तों के से लड़ते नहीं हो आप? कितनी चीजों पे होती है ना बहस. Sometimes you even cut them off ना for a while. Block कर देते हो ना. So with the US, I would say it's an indispensable relationship. If you just saw my latest episode of my Indian diplomacy show on Doordarshan, where I was with Tanvi Madan from Brookings Institution, we are actually talking about why this relationship has persisted. Democrats, Republicans, despite the ideological divisions between them, So from 1999, around 2000, from Bill Clinton until now, Trump 2.0. It's a continuity with some hiccups, with some disappointments, but also a lot of achievements. Let's not forget the achievement just because there is some, case they have registered against some agent for alleged assassination. Let's not get, all I'm saying is think structurally, think logically and structurally, and think long term. Don't get carried away by the momentary heat of the news media cycle. This will also pass. This Khalistan storm is going to pass. The friendship will remain and will continue to grow. Many of you don't know, you're young, but there was a big row between India and the US about 10 years ago over the arrest and the abusive treatment of an Indian diplomat called Devyani Khobragad. It was a big news, and Indian media, how dare the Americans do this? They've insulted, they humiliated India, and we will not take it lying down. You heard a lot of that venting of anger, and then it passed. It was just a cloud, a storm in a teacup. After like 3-4 weeks, we stopped talking about that. That lady was released. She came back. She became India's ambassador to other countries. She's still in the foreign service. Strategic partnership did not get derailed. Why? Obviously, the China factor is the number one factor. There's just no doubt. The balance of power in Indo-Pacific is something that on which we are on the same page. The free and open Indo-Pacific vision, we are on the same page. And there are some differences with the US conception of Indo-Pacific geographically. They think more in terms of the Eastern Indian Ocean and the Pacific. We think not only those, but also the Western Indian Ocean all the way up to the coast of Africa. Whatever, however that be, there are some differences. We have not been able to coordinate with them on all issues. Yes, Bangladesh, there was no coordination with the US. During Biden administration, when they pulled out of Afghanistan, we were very, very disappointed with what they did. And even with Pakistan policy, at times we have been happy with what the US does. Many times we have been disappointed. Historically, it's not been, the congruence has not been there. In fact, in this book, I argue that on the western side of India, US-India cooperation has not been as strong as it should be. It's been weaker because great powers. That's why I talked about the power differential compared to the other 6 friends shown in this book. This friend is a great power. So they try to like manage different. They're like juggling different balls, and they think about a certain region from a great power perspective. We are thinking it from a regional power perspective. So with the US, what happens is, okay, there's a Bay of Bengal region, and as per their logic, they think that India is not doing enough to push back China, so we need to come in and play a more proactive role to push back China in the name of promoting democracy and so on, like they did in Bangladesh. So what I'm trying to say is that there will be differences. To go back to Dr. Jayashankar's speech at my book launch, convergence does not mean congruence, right? So with the US, we have some outstanding issues, but still, it's our number one economic partner, right? It's close to $250 billion. I think we are going to do trade with them. It is actually our number one investor also. If you look at the FDI inflows into India, it's a misnomer to have Singapore and Mauritius as the number one and number two. With Mauritius, they do a lot of round tripping. It's our own big business people who evade taxes by creating shell companies and then bring it back and show it as investment in India. It's not real investment for manufacturing. So the US is the largest investor, and Japan is close second actually, if you take out Mauritius and Singapore. So what I'm trying to say is that the US relationship is our largest relationship. We have a trade surplus with them, which may become a problem with Trump. I'll be happy to talk to you about that in the Q&A. But overall, technology transfer in terms of the high-tech collaboration, it's the most advanced. And the kind of things we are doing with them, like the ISET, you know what is ISET? Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technologies. So these sort of things, now we are also doing with other countries. But the semiconductors agreement, the AI, the quantum, the space, I was in Space Station Houston in Texas last year. And it was so amazing to see they have this Artemis, space accord. And India is listed there with the Indian flag visible there. It's like a, core partner now. For our ISRO and NASA are cooperating closer and closer. So there's a lot of convergences. And of course, we have a huge diaspora there, even bigger than in Australia, 4 million plus. So, and many of them are going to be in important positions. I heard that Vivek Ramaswamy is getting a major role in the Trump administration in one of the key new ministries or departments that they are creating for government efficiency. So, Vivek Ramaswamy is going to be a big player, and many others. So, anyway, what I'm trying to say is this relationship will grow. Do not get carried away by the the tamasha that you see in the evening news cycle in India. Think about the longer term and think about Jaishankar. Think like Jaishankar. He has to preserve these friendships because his goal is to make India a great power, right? You can't be emotional about these things and lose track of the long term objective, which is to make India a great power, a leading power, right? Without the United States, we cannot become. There's just no question of it, right? We need their support, we need their facilitation, and of course, they also benefit from us. It's not a one-way traffic. Okay, let me move on to France. Oh, sorry. Let me talk about Russia because that, of course, is the. In fact, I told the publishers do not show a link between Russia and any of the other US partners because they are on two opposite sides. So this line here, I don't know where it is going. Oh, sorry. We just restore that I touched the screen. Anyway, this line, you see, this is not Russia is not connected to any of the other friends of India, and that's because of the isolation and also because of the the geopolitical tussle in Europe, especially since this war started in 2022. And in fact, in China, which is of course not a friend of India, but once upon a time we even had a strategic partnership with China. Did you know that? 2005. Those were better days. Nowadays, it's unimaginable. China was also a so-called friend of India once upon a time. Anyway, if China was there, probably here, if the Chinese flag was here, then you probably see the Russian connection to there because they are not on good terms with most of these other friends of India, right? But they're still important for us. Why? Legacy issues. We have a long defense partnership with them, right? Bipolar period, unipolar period, and now the emerging multipolar period. All three eras in the last 70 years. Russia has been an oldest friend and continues to be relevant for us. And the way we have done the tightrope over the Ukraine issue, it shows that we are trying to preserve this strategic partnership. And if the war ends, hopefully, if Trump comes in and over the next 1 year, if the war in Ukraine ends or there's a ceasefire and some negotiations, it will be good for us because that will reduce the Russian dependence on China. Right now, they are highly dependent on China. They move closer to China. So, nonetheless, Russia is relevant. Russia remains a major defense partner for us. Today, as of 2023, it still accounts for the largest weapons imports that we have done, around 36%. But we have diversified. We have cut down dependence on Russia. It used to be over 70% 15, 20 years ago. So Russia is still important, but not the central or the most salient one as it used to be in the past for us. And due to the sanctions, due to the technological, export bans and all these things, there is a question mark about Russia's utility for India in the long run. But on energy, we are now buying more oil from them, and it's become our number one oil supplier. So there are other things apart from defense. And ultimately, in Eurasia, the balance of power is such that we would not like, and I think President Putin also would not like that Russia becomes a complete junior partner or subservient to China. So we are part of RIC and BRICS, and we are bilateral cooperation. All these are meant to reduce the potential hegemony of China. Although Russia will not openly say it because they are highly dependent on China right now. But implicitly, not explicitly, Russia helps us to counterbalance China. Even today, I mean, what is the S-400 missile anti-missile system for? We don't need it actually to counter any Pakistani attack. They're so weak, right? But with the Chinese, in fact, S-400 is deployed all along. The batteries are all along the LAC, right? And I start the chapter on Russia with the Rajnath Singh's visit, defense minister's visit to Russia, few days after the Galwan attack, when we lost 20 martyrs, right? And Russia did not hesitate to give us what we wanted. But there is a question mark. There are many people asking, if Russia becomes so dependent on China, will they at some point deny what India needs because of Chinese pressure on them? So there's a real likelihood. We have to be open, and again on this matter, be not emotional. Some people in India, especially old timers, senior diplomat, those who are like, been in this game for like last 30, 40 years, who have dealt with Soviet Union, then with Russia, they feel a kind of nostalgia and an attachment to Russia. And they believe that Russia is going to bounce back and it's, as strong as ever. But my estimation is not so strong. It's just about a $2 trillion economy, and it will not be able to sustain this war economy that we are seeing in the last 2 years. And so Russia, I'm a little bit cautious. I've said that it matters. It's still on the book. It's still one of our top 7, not the number 1 definitely, and certainly not as beneficial for our rise as it used to be once upon a time. Let me move to the West Asian region now. Sorry, let me move to France for a moment. France, like I said, their concept of this middle power, as a middle power, it understands India's dilemmas. And France also has this tradition of strategic autonomy. They talk about it. It's different from our notion of strategic autonomy. Right? Our notion is that we will not bow to any big power or any external pressure. Right? And we have multi-alignment with different players. France is a NATO ally. Right? France is part of the US-led alliance system. But historically, they have not towed the US line on everything. And since Charles de Gaulle's time, after World War II and the 1950s and 60s, France has tried to adopt a kind of an independent position while remaining part of NATO. And they continue to have that vision. They challenge what they call the Anglo-Saxon, dominance within NATO and in the Western alliance. And France always tends to take its own positions on many issues without necessarily following the US line or the American. So that makes it easier to gel with a country like India, because we also are friends with the US, but we don't take orders from them, right? So in that sense, France and India are quite similar. And again, the kind of cooperation we are seeing with France now is very advanced in the Indian Ocean region. They have territories and soldiers and population in the citizens in the Indian Ocean region, right? Can anyone name the French islands, French-owned islands? Yeah, Réunion is one, Mayotte is the other one, off the east coast of Africa, in the western end of the Indian Ocean. And then they also have territories in the Pacific, Caledonia and so on. Right? These are leftovers from the colonial times when France had an empire. They have not given up those territories. They have military bases there. They have Navy and Air Force presence there. And we again, like with Australians, like with Japanese, like with the US, we also have defense interoperability and agreements for using each other's bases and all these things with France. And what is France anxious about? France is also anxious about China, like all the other friends of India. Even Russia is anxious, but like I said, they won't say it publicly. What is France's dilemma? France has these territories, right, which I just mentioned. And here also China is muscling in. China is offering military aid or trying to stoke separatism in these island territories against French rule. And for the Chinese, because they have a lot more resources in the Indo-Pacific, France is far away, right? It's thousands of miles away. They cannot project the same kind of power that China has in this region. So President Macron, Emmanuel Macron is on record criticizing new forms of imperialism in the Indo-Pacific. What he's talking about is Chinese imperialism. On the other hand, the Europeans as a whole have a much milder approach to China. I talk about that in the France chapter. So France is a little bit confused. It doesn't have the same strategic clarity, because for economic cooperation, they are still looking to China. They don't see China as a rival as much as, they say it's both a systemic rival but also a partner. How can it be both? Well, that's the European position, right? They are not very clear like the US. The US is saying this is number one rival and we want to counterbalance. But the Europeans say, well, on some issues we need China and we have to be friends with them. So France is not absolutely clear on counterbalancing China, but increasingly they're coordinating with the US and the rest in the Indo-Pacific. There is the La Perouse naval exercise that happened some time ago, where the French Navy actually joined hands with the Malabar, with the remaining four Quad navies jointly. They're doing patrolling because they have presence and territories here, right? So we can expect more with France than with any other European country in terms of our counterbalancing logic towards China. Although, like I said, France has some mixed approaches to China due to the overall EU approach to China. But France is the one that has pushed the Europeans to have a more robust Indo-Pacific strategy. And we welcome that. We want the Europeans to come in, show presence, and to coordinate with us. Because single-handedly, none of us is able to push back the Chinese expansion. So we will need a lot of these middle power coalitions, especially with countries like France. And we'll have to see the Germans are not there yet. They don't have big military presence here. The British, although they have got AUKUS, they're nowhere close to France in terms of capabilities and power projection in the Indo-Pacific. So France is our number one partner from Europe. And the kind of advanced weaponry we're buying from them and also joint co-producing, the level of trust is very high. And in fact, I think if you remember, I'll give a small anecdote and you'll remember, President Biden was invited for the Republic Day celebration as a chief guest for a long time, and they kept stalling. They kept us waiting, and then finally they said due to some domestic problems in the US Congress and all, he's tied down, he cannot come. And then within like maybe 2 weeks or something like that, or less than that, Prime Minister called Macron. He said, and he adjusted his schedule. These are VVIPs, they are the state leaders, right? Their schedules are drawn up like 6 months or 9 months or 1 year ahead of time, right? And still he made the adjustment and came to India to be for the Republic Day. Prime Minister's gone for the Bastille Day in France. Among all the Western countries, we are most comfortable with France. And what also helps us, France is not very judgmental about internal developments in India, unlike the US, especially, where they have their own mechanisms and a very broad-based set of actors and institutions that keep on meddling and poking at different countries. But France doesn't do that, and France is highly respectful of the internal affairs of its partners. So with France, we have no issues, and I would say the sky is the limit. Space and outer space cooperation is also growing now. There are a lot of new areas I've highlighted in the book. Read the chapter on France. France may actually overtake Russia and become our number one defense partner in not a very short, a long time. They're already close, I think 31-32%, just 3-4% less than Russia right now. And in a way, it helps us to also manage the Western pressures, because those who are saying we are doing too much with Russia, we say, well, we are also buying Rafales from France and Scorpion submarines from France, and we are also doing joint development of advanced weaponry with France. So that kind of closes the argument, because France is part of NATO, right? We can't say that we are only doing stuff with Russia. So there are a lot of things that France does for us which are invaluable. Okay, let me briefly talk about the two partners in West Asia or the Middle East. Israel is not a new strategic partnership. I think we signed it a few years ago. Let me just get you the exact year, 2017, right? That was a very important year because Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian leader to actually do a state visit, a bilateral visit to Israel. Nobody had done it since independence. Diplomatic relations have been on the slow track for a long time. We normalized in 1991-92 during Narasimha Rao's time, but actually the momentum has happened only in the last 10 years. Because it used to be linked with the domestic politics in India, the vote bank politics and all that. What Modi era, what we've done, we have dehyphenated it from all these domestic considerations. This is a critical partner for national security and for counter-terrorism and for us to have an influence and even for economic connectivity with the Middle East and beyond. So we will go with Israel and we'll be part of this. But I do talk about the balancing act India has had to make because of the international opinion and also to some extent domestic opinion since the war began in 2023. How we say we are opposed to terrorism, but we don't want endless war in the region too. We are now supporting a ceasefire in that region, in Gaza and with Lebanon. So, and we continue to support the Palestinian institutions. And those of you who've seen the shiny embassy of the state of Palestine, as it's called in Chanakyapuri, know that we have been always supporting them, the Palestinian Authority, with financial assistance, development aid, and all these things. So what I'm trying to say is, in spite of these, the horrific war and the pressures on us to quote unquote be on the right side of, be it on the Russia-Ukraine war or the Israel-Hamas, and now the Israel Hezbollah and the Israel-Iran kind of a de facto war that's going on. We have not succumbed to pressures, and we have stuck to core national interests, right? But at the same time, some of the positions and the votes we take in the UN and elsewhere show that we have some balance. We are not totally, completely biased in favor of only Israel or only Russia, right? So there is a method in the way we approach this, because we want to maintain these friendships. So with Israel, there's a lot of things that are declassified, which I also don't know. But to the extent that is publicly known, the defense cooperation is very strong. If you know the Barak missile system, for example, it's jointly manufactured by India and Israel, by our two companies from both sides. We do a lot of intelligence sharing on jihadist groups, not only in the subcontinent but worldwide, and including, because many of them have used Dubai and Riyadh and elsewhere as bases in the past. Israeli presence, Israeli networks have been very valuable for us to counter some of these extremist groups. And Israel also offers us advanced technology with which we can track a lot of these groups. No? Sometimes in India it's become a domestic politics that, you know, there's some Pegasus or something, and there's some sinister thing by the Modi government to spy on domestic activists, and such thing. They blame Israel for it. But I'm focusing on what we are doing jointly to mitigate the terrorist threat. And there, the Israeli method is different from the Indian method. I talk about how Israel is a hard state, but India is an assertive state. We are not a hard state like Israel. We cannot be. We cannot afford a lot of collateral damage in counterterrorism missions, unlike Israel. Why? Because India, like I said, is a rising power which will become a great power, right? And such a country cannot. We need a lot of friends. 7 which are covered in my book, but many more for us to enable our right. Israel cannot be a great power ever. It's a small country. It's only fighting for survival. So for them, frankly, all they need is the support of the US. They don't care for the UN or international opinion or any such thing, right? So they go, full steam, and it can lead to war crimes and other problems. I am not denying that, but their methods are not exactly adaptable to us. Sometimes in India, you hear, extreme rhetoric that we should just be like Israel and blow the smithereens out of all our adversaries. It's not possible. We are dealing with nuclear armed adversaries, right? And secondly, we are on the pathway to becoming a leading power. So we have to take along a lot of countries. We cannot alienate them. We are not a US ally which only needs US support. We are a sovereign country with rising aspirations to be a leading power in the world, to be a great power. So anyway, but in spite of this difference in the doctrines, with Israel we are doing a lot. There's also civilian side cooperation. People don't often talk about it. Across India, in agriculture, the Israelis have done amazing things by bringing their advanced drip irrigation and other formula and training our farmers. Thousands of our farmers across different states of India have learned and benefited from Israeli agro scientists and trainings. Just to give one example, there's so many other things we are doing with Israel. Do look it up. How we are managing the so-called controversial side of Israel also, and sustaining this friendship is something worth studying. Last but not least, Emirates. UAE was not on the picture even 10 years ago. We didn't even have a prime ministerial visit to UAE for like decades until Modi came, and he actually saw the potential in the UAE like no previous Indian leader. And today there's only one person in the world whom a prime minister calls my brother. It's who? Mohammed bin Zayed. So the kind of coordination we have done with the UAE is incredible. And there is a strategic element to it. I show how UAE has been instrumental for us to manage the jihadist problem and to rebuild Kashmir. The UAE is a number one foreign investor in Kashmir. And just as Japan is critical for shoring up the northeast of India against the Chinese threat, the UAE has come in and played a big role. An Islamic country has come in and is helping India stabilize and consolidate and normalize things in J&K against the Pakistan-sponsored threat. So in the OIC, the UAE is our best friend. They enable many of our initiatives to go through. On the whole issue of moderate Islam, again, we are very closely aligned with the UAE. So these are big things we are doing, with them. And their investments, we have done a fast-tracked free trade agreement with the UAE, and it has suddenly catapulted UAE to high up the ranks in terms of trade and investment. We have a large diaspora there, like in the US, almost I think now it's going to be close to 4 million. And our citizens, of course, the big difference is the diaspora in the UAE cannot become citizens there. They just go as temporary workers. They are Indian passport holders. The diaspora in the US, most of them, they get dual citizenship or US citizenship. So nonetheless, this large presence of influential Indians there, our expats in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in Sharjah, all these are remarkable successes, and they are actually plowing back capital into India. So the UAE sovereign wealth funds and all, they are doing extraordinary investments in our country. Our growth and modernization is not only dependent on Japan or the US, it's also increasingly going to be dependent on a country like UAE. And with the UAE, we are also part of the I2U2 combination. You know about this, right? Which are the countries in I2U2? Excellent. And there is also the IMEC corridor, right? What does it stand for? Good. The UAE is a core member of both these formations, and the UAE is the one that wants this India to come in a big way into West Asia or the Middle East, because while they are also US allies and partners, these Gulf monarchies are also quite jittery about how reliable the US is. So they are looking to diversify and get more people in, like the Japanese and the Australians in this side vis-a-vis China. Here, they are not sure as to about the Iranian challenge to them, and they're looking for more players who can come in and, if not counterbalance Iran, then at least be present to create incentive structures so that Iran doesn't become a spoiler. For example, the Houthi missile attacks. The UAE has been involved in, because UAE is developing a navy and has got a military, even though it's a very small country, and is part of these coalitions to try and deter the Houthi attacks on the commercial shipping passing through the Bab al Mandab and the Red Sea and all that. So Emirates increasingly is also entering into defense cooperation with India, and this is going to grow. And this is a complete turnaround, because at one time Emirates was dependent on Pakistan for its security in the early years after it was created, as a nation state, 1970s, 80s, and at that time they were very pro-Pakistan in most of their approaches. But there's been a change, especially under Mohammed bin Zayed. And I give the example of the IC-814 hijacking, the one that happened in 1999, yeah. And at that time, actually, the hijackers, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, Masood Azhar and that gang, they actually landed the aircraft in Dubai for refueling, and then they took off. Ultimately, they took it to Kandahar and put it on Taliban controlled territory, and they did that, trade the deal with us to release hostages. If something like that were to happen today, you can imagine what will be the reaction of the UAE. At that time, they said, well, it's something between India and Pakistan, and we don't want to upset our member of the OIC and a fellow Islamic country, so we will not. So they actually did not cooperate with us in 1999. You fast forward to today, the kind of, it's not just the statements that the UAE gives, it's also concrete cooperation that's happening at the level of national security advisors, level of militaries, intelligence sharing. It's a complete turnaround. And why? Because they themselves have realized that this jihadist monster can swallow their own monarchical systems and regimes. They have seen the so-called Arab Spring and overthrows of a lot of established governments in the region, and they're very, very scared of radical Islamist groups. So the UAE actually is very keen to try and crush these groups in coordination with a country like India. So let me stop there. So to conclude, the friends that we have, are critical for our rise. We cannot really have any kind of a long-standing continuous rise of this country without these friendships. Let me be clear, I am not saying that economic growth and military modernization don't matter for a country to become a great power. They are the fundamental, they are the like the hardware, if you like, right? But then you also need the diplomacy to maintain these friendships so that there is no external environment that is adversarial or negative for us to rise. Think about it as this ceiling, right? It's this high, so there is headroom. There's headroom, and I can maybe grow taller. I can't, but I'm saying, imagine, okay? And अभी 5 फुट 6 का हूं मैं, अगर 6 फुट 6.5 भी बन सकता हूं तो फिर भी there is headroom, right? For me to grow, right? But अगर मान लीजिए ये छत यहाँ पर है, okay? US is opposed to India. We have spoiled our relations with them. China anyway is breathing down our necks, and most of the other countries are indifferent to India. We have not made any friendships. मान लीजिए, we have not cultivated and carefully built these friendships. Let's say, okay, counterfactual. छत यहाँ पर होती और भी नीचे आती and आपको दबा के रखती so that you may actually fall on the ground. That would be India's condition. So what I'm trying to say is that, we have to invest in these relationships. We have to be mature about them. We have to actually build these partnerships, and the prefixes we are adding, the table you see at the end, pehle strategic partner, then after some years comprehensive strategic partnership, then global and comprehensive strategic partnership, then something else. We keep adding those to show the importance of these countries and how we are doing more and more with them. And they benefit also from India, from access to a market, from our military cooperation with them, and the support that we give to them in international fora. In the case of UAE, for example, the tolerance and the multi pluralism and all these things, it helps to counter a lot of negative, propaganda against India that minorities are under threat in India and all that. The UAE helps us. It amplifies this message worldwide. Here's an Islamic country that's supporting us in a big way, right? So I'm just giving one example. So hardware, and you do need economic growth. We have to have double-digit growth for the next 10-15 years to become not just a developed country in terms of the high per capita income, but to become a leading power or a great power, right? We need that. We do need to spend more on defense, at least 3% of GDP on defense over the next 10-15 years. We haven't done enough so far. Much more will be needed. But the third element, apart from these two, are these friendships, strategic partnerships, or if you want to call it in a more generic way, kind of a sharper edged diplomacy that helps us to advance these friendships and make them stronger and consolidate them. We will not go for alliances for the moment. The epilogue of the book, I do talk about alliances. Why has India avoided alliances? Why are we only doing strategic partnerships? What are the pros and cons of strategic partnership vis-a-vis alliances? I talk about it, so you please read it and you tell me what you think about it. My view is that it depends, a lot of it depends on China's behavior in the coming decade or longer. If they are becoming more assertive and aggressive and pushy, if they impose a war on us, we may have to enter into alliances. And if you go back in time, 1971, it's a de facto alliance with Soviet Union, right? Although we were saying that we are non-aligned, actually we aligned with the Soviet Union at the time to prevent to create for the creation of Bangladesh. So I think a lot of it depends. Some of these strategic partnerships may become formal alliances. I am not ruling them out, but of course in India we have a tradition. We say of our autonomy, we have to preserve a strategic autonomy. Alliance is bad. Alliance means that we have to toe the line of the big brother in the group, But I think it's an open-ended question. We don't know whether we'll need alliances with mutual defense agreements and commitments and guarantees from partners that if I am attacked, then I'll come to your rescue. If you are attacked, I'll come to your rescue. Right now, none of these partnerships have any such formal mutual defense obligations, right? But what if China imposes a war on us? What if there is a two-front war? Okay, to prevent our rise, to prevent us from catching up with them or overtaking them in the next 10-15 years. We are already growing faster than them, right? Our growth is like 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 percentage points faster than China's. So the gap is going to close. And will the Chinese like it, or will they fall into what is called the Thucydides trap and attack us militarily to try and stop us or to quote unquote teach us a lesson, right? In that situation, maybe we'll need an alliance to deter this potential attack. I don't know, for signaling or for deterrence we may need. So we will not do alliances for the moment. These tight friendships, these BFFs are what we need for the moment. But it's a dynamic situation. Things are getting worse. The tensions in the Indo-Pacific are only going to rise, not calm down. Do not be lulled by a small agreement we had with the Chinese, which is a tactical one, to end one standoff at one point in the LAC, which happened recently. Do not believe that as a result of this, that now the competition and the rivalry and all of it is gone, and now we can again be friends, or if not, Hindi chini bye bye. It's not going to happen because of the structural reasons, because of the competition. We are in the same region. If it is Brazil and China, they have been two different continents, thousands of miles away. We don't mind Brazil becoming assertive, right? But if our next door neighbor is becoming assertive and pushing and trying to displace our influence or prevent our rise, what is our option? Do we have to go for alliance? I'm leaving it as an open-ended question for all of you to think, okay? But for now, let's stick to these partnerships. Let's nurture these partnerships. Let's also appreciate the positive things that we do with these partners. Let's not get carried away by, like I said, minor irritants or occasional hiccups. Okay? Thank you very much.
If you have any doubt,
Girls, can we have girls please first?
Sir, Modi government often talks about first neighborhood policy. So I think Bangladesh is also our very good friend from the past. We can see that, and Bangladesh and India mutually benefits each other, and it is important for the northeast side also, because if to counterbalance China, because if China is good to Bangladesh, like good friend to Bangladesh, then the whole northeast is being blocked. The chicken snake corridor, they can block the whole northeast, and already they feel alienated from India. So what is your take about it? Like, you have not mentioned Bangladesh in the friends.
Yeah, no, thank you. No neighboring country is listed as a friend or a most consequential friendship. First of all, we have not signed any formal strategic partnership with Bangladesh or with any neighboring country, right? So I first started with the list that we officially have. Official strategic partners are 36. They don't include a single neighboring country. But at one point, in fact, I quote our former Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla saying that Bangladesh is more than a strategic partner. It's a very special thing and all that. But now, as you know, since the regime overthrow, we are not sure about whether that can be sustained at the same level. The worst case scenario is it becomes another Taliban type of a state, like another Afghanistan. I hope not. So we'll have to see. I mean, we are still trying to make sure that our influence remains there. But with the regime change, we can't be sure. So I did not include any neighboring country as a strategic partner, simply because they are not officially designated as strategic partners. But yeah, neighborhood always matter. In fact, all these friends help us to shore up our neighborhood. If you go into the individual chapters, with the US, it's been a disappointment, like I said, in the neighborhood. But with many other countries, we are jointly doing things in the neighboring countries. So there's a lot of, for example, in Sri Lanka, Japan and India, Australia and India, there's a lot of, and with the US in Nepal, for example. So a lot of these neighboring countries, the Chinese are coming in with the wads of cash to throw around and to buy loyalty. We can't individually counter them, so we are doing kind of like counter bidding for infrastructure projects, for all these things jointly with these countries, right? So neighborhood matter, but neighborhood is more like the terrain. Neighborhood is like the field on which these friendships are being enacted. Neighborhood itself, I don't think the neighbors can be called strategic partners, because generally partners help us to expand our, like I said, expand our influence in faraway parts of the world. So the neighboring countries cannot help us to expand, in faraway parts. It's just something to more to defend and to hold on to. It's not a help us to expand our influence.
Sir, before PM Modi occupies the South Bloc, the more officials of foreign ministry were oriented towards communist lining. For example, Shiv Shankar Menon, Shyam Saran, which help us to pacify the relations with China, which absent after 2014. So can we state it as a reason for having a deadlock with China? And my one supplementary question is, can a foreign policy of a country can be a approach more toward policy centric rather than people centric, because it is looking more like one man army, two man show from any book or discussion.
Okay, on China question, no, I don't think it has to do with changed ideology in India. We were wanting to coexist with them, provided they also accept our rise. But under Xi Jinping, I would not say 2014. The big break is 2012. Once he came into power and began this what he called the great power diplomacy, or a new kind of a approach of China, which is to impose its will on the weaker neighbors and smaller neighbors. That is the beginning of the friction, because then they're trying to, okay, this is the LAC according to us, and we will push you to the limits and we will occupy these places. This is the Indian Ocean is not a Indian lake, it is a open sea for everyone, and we can also come in and send our submarines and our military vessels there. South Asia is not India's backyard. It is these are sovereign countries. We can also come in and do business and have influence in this country. So once they approach that, adopted that kind of an approach, a kind of an aggressive push for hegemony, that is when we started having problems with it. That's why I said 2005, during Manmohan Singh's time, there was no threat perception of China. At the time, in fact, we had strategic partnerships like Russia, US. We signed in 2004. USA, most of the strategic partnerships in those days, in the early days when we were signing them, were for counter-terrorism and such things. It's not aimed at China at that time, not for counterbalancing China. Now the nature of the friendship has changed because the perception of China as a threat has increased. I don't think it has to do with ideology, whether it is Manmohan Singh or Modi. Rather, they have changed. The nature of the Chinese dictatorship, the authoritarianism has changed. So we are adjusting to that change, and that's why I said even with alliances, we may have alliances if required, because if the Chinese change even further and become even worse with us, we have no option. So I think that's the main issue. Your second question was. Okay. No, I think we have a very sound structural policy. This book is not about Prime Minister or his influence alone, and nor is it centered around his personality. And I think I've done two books before this, Crunch Time and Modi Doctrine, which are more about the impact of his personality. One thing which can be said is he sensed some opportunities and he grasped them much better than previous leaders on diaspora, for example. We become big force multiplier for us. It was not there before Modi. UAE, Australia, Israel, these are all new friends that I've shown, right? In the pre-Modi era, there was nothing much happening with them. So you have to give him credit, him and his team. And of course, Jaishankar is very critical for that. And he's been, in many ways, the main propellant for maintaining these friendships. So I don't think it's a personality-centric approach. I think we are very much looking at long term. The vision of the Amrit Kal is for us to become a great power or a leading power. No, the counterpart to Viksit Bharat is leading power in geopolitics. How do we become a leading power? It takes a whole of country approach. It's not just one individual. I don't think we are going by that. It's all of you. You're all part of this big movement to make India a leading power in the world. Girls students.
Sir, keeping in mind the like there is a surety of China's rise. It might be.
Can you stand up, please? I can hear you better. Yeah.
We have to keep in mind that China is going to rise. On a more realistic perspective, if it's not hegemony, it will be bipolarity. So, keeping in mind that India is placed geographically in a hostile neighborhood, isn't it keeping in the way forward? Shouldn't India be appeasing to China and focusing on the rise of their own power and becoming a leading power? Not just appeasement, but we are non-aligned as a country. We have in bipolarity we have worked with US and Russia both. So shouldn't India have a similar approach with rising of China as well, and focusing on our increase of power?
Okay, there are some people who are saying there should be some non-alignment 2.0 and we should maintain equal distance between China and the US. Tell me something. Between these two great powers, who is the one who has territorial claims on us? Who is the one? Who's the one which is trying to displace our influence in our neighborhood and in the oceans? Who's the one who's trying to, block at every stage our access to advanced technologies or our seat in the Security Council? Yeah. Who's the one that is not comfortable with our rise? I think it's China, right? So there's no question of being equidistant between the US and China.
No, sir, but isn't dialogue going to help and help our country isolate and improve in the coming years?
We are engaging. We have done so many rounds of negotiations with them, and now again a high level. I think that the summit level also, Prime Minister met Xi Jinping. So we would like to avoid war, but can they be partners with us? No, there's no way. Of course, there's a large trade volume with a huge deficit in their favor, and that is a problem. And we're trying to find alternatives and to gradually reduce dependence on China. But all of these countries have trade with China, by the way. The US, the number one adversary of China, also does a lot of trade with them, right? So that doesn't mean that automatically that we should be partners with China. Japan, massive trade and investment relation with China. But if you ask their national security side, they'll say it's our number one adversary, much more lethal than North Korea. So I think the facts are quite clear. We are, like I said, go by the logic of geopolitics. We share this region, this Indo-Pacific. They don't even want to accept that there's something called Indo-Pacific. The Chinese say that there's only Asia-Pacific. They don't want to accept that something called an Indian Ocean. So at every level, their approach is we will impose our will, and the Indians and all the other smaller countries, Vietnamese, Indonesians, Taiwanese, Australians, Japanese, Koreans, everybody has to kowtow before us. So they have a neo-imperialist attitude. In earlier times, we used to think that the US is the neo-imperialist. People on the left and the communists and all, they had this ideology that the US, because the capitalist state is the number one threat. That's how they used to portray it. But increasingly, you find that the US, especially under Trump, they're very isolationist. They are not interested in meddling and trying to overthrow regimes, and you will see that they're less and less involved. They're trying to actually withdraw from many regions of the world. So I don't think that there's any question of being equidistant. But with the Chinese, yeah, I mean, we would like to avoid war. We would like to avoid more incidents like Galwan. We would like them to respect the LSE agreements. We would like them to also respect our sensibilities. In fact, Prime Minister said that mutual respect and mutual sensitivity should be given top preference. What is he talking about? In other words, he's saying that if you think Tibet and Taiwan are sensitive to you, Pakistan and Arunachal are sensitive to us, right? So I think if they moderate their stances, if the Chinese moderate their stances, we will be willing to coexist with them. We don't want war. We cannot afford war with such a big country, right? But if they're not willing to coexist, if they're not willing to tolerate our rise, if they're going to try and stymie India's rise, what is our option? We need to gang up with all these people. There's just no other option.
Hello. Sir, I have two questions. The first one is more pertinent to the book, and the second one has a wider scope. So my first question is, why have you not included any partner from Africa, especially in context of we working with the African Union last year at G20? Okay. Now the wider scope question is that China kept growing from 1980s onwards till it antagonized a critical mass of nations. While a lot is going on for India currently, what do you think are top 3 downside risks to India's growth so that we achieve our vision of Viksit at 2047?
Okay. Why have I not included a country from Africa in this list? Geography matters. All these are in our immediate or extended neighborhood, right? France, because of its Indian Ocean territories and presence, is a kind of like a resident power. Nigeria or South Africa, they are big countries, especially Nigeria is the biggest in Africa and has a huge population and is an emerging power also. We just don't do enough security cooperation with them for them to merit this list of the top partner. We have strategic partnerships in Africa. Among those 36, if you go to the annexure, I mentioned a few of them. Sorry, I'm just, yeah. We have one with Rwanda, we have one with South Africa, we have one with Tanzania, and Prime Minister is going to Nigeria soon. So we have some robust relationship, but most of them are economic and commercial. So it doesn't meet my three criteria rule in terms of defense cooperation, in terms of geopolitical power projection. They are not as helpful as any of these countries. Your second question was about downside risk to India's rise. One, I've already mentioned, a preemptive war imposed by China to try and stop us before we catch up with them. Two, lot of high level of internal unrest and political instability and a weak center. On the day of the general elections in June this year, when the results were coming out, I was only praying that we should not have a weak center. They still managed to, Prime Minister's party managed to get 240. If they ended up with 150, it would be like UPA, with dozens and dozens of partners and a very weak foreign policy. So I was only, okay, if they don't get a majority, well, that's a shock, but at least they should be close to majority. So I think that's one downside. If there is a future election or something which will lead to a very weak center or a very fragmented center, that's a danger. And third thing, I would say, globally, if there are, more protectionist tendencies and currents, like Trump is in some ways good for us, but they're also negative. It's a contradiction, it's a bundle of contradictions, right? So if they actually try to wall off the flow of foreign investments into our country, until 2023 we are doing okay with foreign, but last year there was a sudden dip in inward FDI. And if the currents are all about what we call nearshoring or onshoring, and if the big power capital centers of capital withdraw, they leave China, but they don't come back. They don't come elsewhere like India, but they go back to their native places, to the home turf for manufacturing at home. I think that will be also a downside risk, because it will slow down our growth. Growth and FDI are very closely linked. We cannot sustain high growth without a larger and larger one. We need 200 billion of FDI per annum. Right now, we touched around 90 billion, 80 to 90 billion until 2022, 23, and now suddenly it has dipped. This year, we are hoping to get back to 100 billion or so. So we will need that. So I think these probably are the top three in my sense. But you pose a tricky question, so I have to think about if something else can also be a big obstacle.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we very proudly use the term strategic autonomy in justifying our decisions in the international relation. But there's a common saying that everyone's friend is no one's friend. So how far the countries will trust India in the long run? I mean, the
Because
US ambassador also said
because
that.
we are pally with so many people. You're saying how can we be trusted?
Yes, sir. How can we be trusted by the other countries in the long run foreign policy? As the US ambassador also stated that in the wartime, you have to choose sides.
I mean, see, that is the Western viewpoint. Generally, they say that Russia is of no use to you. It is a declining country. Don't align with Russia. But we have good reasons to continue to maintain the ties with Russia. See, in spite of our Russia friendship, the US has not imposed sanctions, right? CATSA and other things. Why? It's because they cannot antagonize India for other reasons. Russia is not so important for them. Russia is not the principal adversary for the US. Russia is like actually a declining. I mean, it's just got like a $2 trillion economy, and it's very. It's not the kind of. It only has a nuclear arsenal. So I think somebody in the US government said that it's like Greece with a lot of nuclear weapons or something like that. So Russia is a military power, but even that has been exposed to some extent with the failures in Ukraine. So I think they will accept India. In fact, if you read Why Bharat Matters by Dr. Jaishankar, I did a show which I did 55 minutes one-on-one with him on his book. You must watch my show, Indian Diplomacy Special with Dr. Jaishankar. Happened about 6-7 months ago. The crux of the book is that the world must accept us as we are. We are not willing to bend and to adapt to the needs or the demands of others. We are now big enough and growing faster, so the world has to accept them as we are. And if you're not willing to accept us, you're not our friends. That's all. These friends, despite the differences, will accept and continue to accept. So I think it's not a problem if we have friends in different geopolitical camps, east, west, north, south. It's not a problem because we are able to convince our friends that there are reasons, good reasons why we need these friends. In fact, we've had a lot of dialogue with the Americans and the Europeans since the Ukraine war to explain to them in no unclear terms why we need Russia. There's some things about Russia that they cannot substitute, at least not immediately, right? France has come in, but France cannot do the servicing of our old Sukhoi jets or MiG jets, right? Or our aircraft carrier. So Russia will remain. So they understand, and that's why they are close friends, because close friends understand. They don't like something you're doing, but they will still remain friends with you.
I think we should take the last question now because already 1:30.
Can we ask girl students?
Yeah.
Hi, sir. We say that a real enemy is poverty and employment when we talk about our spendings on defense, and there come the role of diplomacy, as you have highlighted. But like he said, that how long we are going to stand out on our approach of strategic diplomacy and the tightrope situation that we are walking on, like in Israel-Hamas issue or Russia-Ukraine issue. How long we are going to sustain? Like, we are in BRICS as well, we are in Quad as well. So how long we are going to sustain this tightrope situation? Also, you have said that we do the strategic partnership with those who contribute in our us making the major power. But when the Chinese question come, don't you think that we should engage more in our neighborhood or in the Asian countries, like they're leading more towards China? And like the corridors that we're talking about, or the ports, etc. So if they fear that big brother syndrome that they fear of India, so if we could have built more relation with our neighbors or Asian countries, we would have been at least not expanding but countering the Chinese question that we are facing, I think, more than anyone else.
Yeah, no, good ones. Second one first. No, there's no contradiction between having strategic partnerships with these countries and with investing our energy in the neighborhood. We are parallelly doing both. It's not like either or. It's not like all our time. It's not like Dr. Jaishankar and his team are spending all their time only on these countries, right? The number of visits and the number of continuous maintenance of relationship that he does with neighboring countries is equal or even more in number than the visits he does to these countries, right? So and on the ground, the projects that we do in the neighborhood and all continue. They are not contradictory to these friends. How long we can sustain these friendships despite the fault lines? It's a good question. So far, we are doing okay. We have not been forced to abandon any of our friends because of the geopolitical problems or wars. But we are now, unfortunately, in an era of wars. There are more wars happening, there are more violence and more conflict than even like 5 years ago. So you can expect new crises to emerge. Some other country may attack someone else. If the Chinese try to invade Taiwan, that's going to be a major shake up of the order in Indo-Pacific. What will be Trump administration's response to it, for example? Huge question mark. So will we be neutral in these kind of situations? I think no. I think when there is an instance of Chinese aggression on any neighboring country, we cannot afford to be neutral or just sit back and watch. In fact, that's why we are doing the BrahMos. We did the BrahMos deal with the Philippines. It's not because Philippines is a buyer and we are getting some cash, foreign exchange. It's improving our foreign exchange. It's because we believe that they need to find more means to deter Chinese aggression, right? So we will be proactive. There are a lot of scenarios happening in our military academies about what if the Chinese impose a limited war on us? How do we respond? Or what if they attack Taiwan? Or or Vietnam or Indonesia or Japan or Australia or any other country with whom they have disputed claims. So what if they encroach deeper into Nepal from across the Chinese occupied Tibet? So these are scenarios, and we have some contingency plans, but there will be crises, and I don't think we will be neutral when it's a question. I mean, Russian aggression over Ukraine, it was thousands of miles away, and we said, okay, at the end of the day, it is not a core national security issue for us, right? Chinese aggression against Vietnam or Indonesia or against Taiwan or Japan is a core national security interest. We can't simply cast look the other way around. So I think we will make a call, and we will stand with those forces who are trying to maintain balance of power in Asia. We are not going to be we are not going to allow the Chinese to just roll over and to expand. So on that question, I think you will not find India being a fence sitter or a neutral or abstaining. If China attacks a country in Asia, okay, the way Russia has attacked Ukraine, we will not abstain. We will vote against it, and we will, collectively with all these friends, try to set up a collective pushback or a deterrence mechanism.
Good afternoon, sir. Let it be the last good afternoon. Okay. Yeah, please. My question is related to the Islamic terrorism. There is a worldwide emergence of Islamic terrorism. Suppose in the Middle East, in the name of Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, in Asia, in the name of Taliban, Jaish Muhammad Haqqani network. According to the Fonta poll, that is a French think tank, the Islamic terrorism has taken away the lives of more than 2.5 lakhs innocent people in more than 50,000 terrorist attacks. My first question is, who will be accountable for those losses of life? Second, why there is a lack of consensus worldwide when it comes to fight against the Islamic terrorism? Third is it possible to eliminate the Islamic terrorism from the face of the world?
Okay, why is there no consensus? I'll only answer the first question. I'll only answer the first one. Why is it there no consensus? It's because of geopolitics. I mean, it's not only Islamic countries. There are a lot of, like, China has been shielding most wanted terrorists of India for a long time in the UN, right? And the Chinese have a deal with Taliban and also possibly with ISIS and other groups. They have networks on the ground in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region to say, don't attack us. Of course, the Baloch are not a jihadist group, so Baloch are continuing to attack the Chinese interests. But the Chinese are willing to play politics because for them, the number one priority is not countering jihadist extremism. The number one priority is how to contain and to prevent India from rising. So if it requires stoking of Islamic fundamentalism, they'll do it in order to keep us down. So a lot of countries don't think of this as the number one priority. They think of this as someone else's problem. My problem is my adversary, conventional adversary. And we are now in the era of conventional great power rivalry and interstate rivalry. We are not in the era of non-state actors and transnational terrorism and all that. They are less important as national security threats compared to conventional adversaries. So we are back to the Cold War type of logic now. So I think unfortunately on this matter, not many countries will prioritize it. Even though we have been pushing for consensus building and a convention against terrorism at the UN and all that, most countries think that it's not that important anymore, and so they will, in fact, they'll try to instrumentally use this as a weapon against their adversaries rather than try and crush these terrorists. This is the unfortunate reality.
So thank you, Professor Sreeram, for very wonderful and very informative lecture. And I think that in a very short time, there is such a big qualitative improvement in my own understanding and knowledge. Thank you so much. And I believed that these few the time that you have taken, it has saved my immense labor that I would have invested in, because the India and the major power is a very important topic in civil services. We got very new insights, new language, lot of data, and I personally feel it is a must read book, consider it as a textbook for the international relations part. I don't think anything can be much better for UPSC students this year, because we never have a book. Either there are books which are covering almost all areas, but they are not so specialized. So whether you will go in interviews, you will have to write answers in mains. The way I was listening and I was realizing this book has to be recommended. Do read this book. It is very enlightening, very useful. This is what I am going to do first thing when I go home. Today itself I will finish, because sir has given so much insights. I think we have a good background now to read and to understand the concept, context, very qualitative inputs. So do read the book, because lot of facts are there which are very essential and very nice, valuable perspective. Thank you sir for enlightening us. Yeah. Today I am going to do this thing. Even if I have to take off tomorrow, I'll do. But I'll read it. Yeah, I'll read it. Thank you, sir.
So, as I announced at the beginning of the session, if you want to buy the book, it is available in the parking area, and you can get it signed by Dr. Sreeram Chaulia. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining.